The silver-haired girl's eyes widened as she heard the unexpected announcement, and the signature below stated that from today on, she was considered someone's wife. The dark-haired young man clenched his fist, mentally noting that the villainess who had found herself in their border family, connected to aristocrats and mercenaries, unexpectedly knew how to do everything. Then the young man smiled slightly, admitting to himself that he wanted to resist, but he understood that in this world such thoughts meant nothing, and he brushed them aside. At this time, the silver-haired beauty reflected on the fact that in the world of the Otome game, only she could save the villain from her predetermined path of destruction, standing among a field of flowers by the river. Meanwhile, a young man named Ragnabrave sat at his desk, angrily complaining about having to deal with cumbersome papers even though he lived in a world of swords and magic. Soon, an elderly man in a formal suit approached Seabass, who quietly remarked that most of the mansion's inhabitants had fallen in battle. The young master sharply demanded help, but the girl restrainedly reminded him that the new lord was obliged to take responsibility for himself, addressing him directly. Afterwards, they showed the borderlands known as the Brave Domain. It was a harsh territory, teeming with monsters and constantly plagued by skirmishes with neighboring countries, leading many nobles to abandon it. The young man remembered that his father and older brothers had been warriors, and someone nearby had noted with surprise that in their family there was finally a person capable of handling paperwork. From an early age, the boy was trained for war. At just 3 years old, he had to fight an orc. A month ago, the battlefield turned into a cemetery, where his entire family perished. Now the young man had to take on the legacy of the borderlands as the sole survivor. He bitterly admitted that he dreamed of the life of a free adventurer, not the heavy burden of a ruler. The boy tried to refuse, but was reminded that his duties still had to be fulfilled. Meanwhile, two servants discussed how the Bravelands were sustained by natural resources, monsters, and adventurers. He thought about the difficulties of self-sufficiency. The fields were burned to the ground by enemies, and the mountains were impossible to develop because of monsters that turned labor into chaos. The heir then explained that their family was completely dependent on the support of other aristocrats, and he himself would have to go to the capital's academy to secure alliances. However, he was worried about whether he would be able to approach the nobility and persuade them to help. The young man insisted that he could refuse admission, despite the family tradition, but the senior advisor calmly interrupted him and noted that there was a more important conversation. He learned of the sudden marriage proposal and dubiously inquired about the rush. But his interlocutor calmly replied that such matters were commonplace for the lord. A girl nearby recalled that the young man's brothers also had brides, but they hated these lands and never settled here. Moreover, they didn't even come to the funeral and seemed relieved upon learning of his death. The heir considered ending the whole affair, but his companion sharply objected, reminding him that this was unacceptable. Then he anxiously asked if Seabass understood him. The young owner declared that he intended to live away from the capital and manage the lands only during the holidays, but the older man firmly refused, handing him a pen while the young man insisted that he was too busy. He was finally shocked to learn that the proposed marriage was from the Oldwoods, a ducal family that supplied them with weapons and food. The young man recalled his past after the orcs' attack and realized with surprise that he knew this world. He was tormented by the question of why the memory of it had only surfaced now. Then he began to think about reincarnation and tried to remember the name of the game from which the events took place. In his past life, he had been attracted to Japanese culture, and this haunted him. At the same time, the girl realized that she found herself in the world of the very same game plot that she had once played. After this, the narrative shifted focus to a typical Otome game world, where the main character, from a common family, studied at an academy for nobles and could fall in love with several suitors. Meanwhile, the young man was reading a book about how frequent wars turned the royal capital into a battlefield, and behind him the castle was burning. Then the boy grumbled about the appearance of a girl named Alicia, the prince's villainous fiancée, who kept interfering. Her image flashed on the game screen. Soon, caustic words were heard. A noble girl called the simpleton the worst in character and arrogant, and a group of elegant ladies demanded that the heroine remember her place. Gradually, the main character grew closer to the prince, which led to further attacks from Alicia. The feud between them escalated to a duel for the heir's affections. The result was a crushing defeat for the villainess, as she was immediately deprived of her engagement to the prince right in front of everyone.
The girl recalled that Alicia accepted guilt for her actions and was ultimately forced into marriage with a border nobleman. She saw the mansion before her and realized it was her home. At this time, the young man lay face down on the bed and gloomily thought that living together with this aristocrat would be the worst outcome for him. The girl complained furiously about the daily insults, while the man merely bowed silently. Soon, another man informed the serious gentleman that she had arrived, causing concern in the woman who was to accompany her to the academy. The young master approached Seabass and asked why a girl raised for the prince had appeared in their house. The elder replied that it was a way to get rid of inconvenient people and set an example for others. The young man was amazed when someone nearby, pressing his hand to his chest, explained that in the lands of the Braves the mortality rate was extremely high. After the war, the servants worked tirelessly to ensure the survival of the family, and the butler had to remind the young master that he, too, had to do his share of the effort. Two men stood by the stables, one looking anxiously at the road. Soon, a woman rode up to the house, and a polite servant bowed, inviting her inside. She carefully opened the door, her face remained serious and a little tense, but behind this restraint one could see determination. The young man flinched when the older man called him young master and introduced himself as Seabass. The girl with the burn on her face calmly noted his surprise, and he sheepishly suggested they not bring it up if it bothered her. After that, the dark-haired guy smiled softly and said that in the lands of the Braves, such scars are a common occurrence for people. He answered her timid question confidently, adding that the soldiers and adventurers here were always covered in wounds, and Alicia's burn was probably caused by a duel. A long-haired girl held papers in her hands, while whispers echoed around her that her beauty had been ruined and she was doomed to a life of shame. These words evoked obvious disgust and confusion among those gathered. Then one of the men noticed Alicia and expressed surprise that the Duke's daughter had neither a maid nor an escort. She politely stated that she intended to leave. After this, the carriage rolled quietly along a forest road. The camera showed the young man's anxious face, and then a woman with a neat bun, walking between two men in formal attire, carrying only a single suitcase without a servant. Soon her gaze dropped downwards, and her expression became reminiscent of a captured soldier of an enemy power, as if she had resigned herself to her fate and lost all hope. The young man was slightly nervous, adjusting his collar and feeling a slight sweat on his temples. He thought that what was happening did not match his expectations, while the butler politely escorted Lady Alicia. The boy expected her to be arrogant, but politely offered to show her to her quarters. She gently asked him to wait, barely touching his hand. Meanwhile, she calmly parried the blow with her hand, standing next to the man, and both looked focused and serious. Then the long-haired girl asked if she was dusty, apologizing for her old clothes. The young man assured her that their home was even more rundown, and the little girl briefly agreed. After this, a sinister creature called the demon bug was shown in the palm of the hand, which was described as a curse born of hatred and doomed to ruin the life of its owner. The young man explained that Alicia had about 100 of these creatures attached to her, reflecting the hostility she felt. Another man remarked that the hatred toward her had accumulated to an extreme. He himself then suffered excruciating pain under the influence of these creatures, and the narrative explained that any ordinary person would have long since lost his mind, but she remained surprisingly calm and unharmed. At the same time, the princess reflected on her upbringing in a noble family and wondered whether challenging a commoner to a duel would really cause such a stir. The young man admitted to himself that he needed to reconsider his views. The story went on to clarify that in the world of an otome game, the role of an antagonist is necessary to add drama to the plot, even if it distorts Alicia's personality. Meanwhile, he thought about their common difficult path, realizing that fate was twisting both of them, and she looked away with a serious expression. Another scene showed a woman with white hair and horns, engulfed in flames. She was described as having made a pact with a demon and been transformed into a monster whose thirst for vengeance devastated the brave lands. The young man realized he felt like an outsider in this story and began to worry that all of this would inevitably affect Alicia. He realized the situation was truly becoming dangerous. Then he thought about the fate of his lands, feeling hopeless and believing that both he and Alicia had become victims of circumstances. Despite his doubts, the young man gathered his courage and decided to help her start her life anew and regain her strength and confidence. She, in turn, reflected that if their fate was inevitable, then at least it was worth maintaining a positive attitude. And finally, the two of them stood silently as a huge centipede approached them.
The young man then decisively crushed it with his foot, vowing to destroy anything that threatened their lives. The determined girl calmly declared that she was going to resist this world, and then a surprised voice was heard, calling her words into question. Then the young man chuckled and reduced what he had said to trivialities, stretching and promising to try, while she watched nearby with interest. After this, the guy thought that he hadn't received such a carefree smile for a long time, and next to him, a serious girl with a ribbon in her hair silently looked ahead. Meanwhile, the young man passed by a lonely lady standing on a stone path, and the narrative emphasized that something strange was born in her heart that no one around noticed. Soon, the platinum-haired girl quietly repeated her intention to resist this world, and again someone responded in surprise. However, instead of experiencing violent emotions, she simply silently accepted the food and remained locked in the room, without showing irritation or saying bad words about anyone. Then the young man irritably explained that he was busy exterminating demonic beetles, which could be magically sent to distant targets, while leaning against the wall. Soon, the young owner sighed heavily, admitting to Seabass that he couldn't cope with their number, and Seabass calmly noted his difficulties. The boy thought about tracking down the source, but heard a warning that it could destroy the entire house. The girl insisted that it was necessary to deal with Alicia's heart, which was attracting these creatures, but the young man brushed it off, saying that only the brave family knew how to fight, and doubted her capabilities. Then he wondered what it meant to be an ordinary young man, and the elderly servant calmly assured him that everything would work out. After a while, there was a knock at the door and the man announced that breakfast was ready, while the young host suggested sharing a meal, as if at a tea party, to strengthen the bond. After this, the cheerful guy enthusiastically invited everyone to wake up and join breakfast, confidently walking away from the door with his hand raised. The girl quickly declared that she had not slept for a long time and that the door was about to collapse, while the young man admitted that he was afraid of her desperate act, and a woman nearby calmly assessed the situation. She was worried about the door's fragility, but the boy reassured her, saying that he knew how to fix it, and the girl herself thought it was unusual to see a nobleman doing such a thing. Then he invited her to share the meal. Later, she coughed and complained about the bitter taste of the coffee, and then apologized, explaining that she was used to tea at home and was trying this drink for the first time. He then explained that the ingredient was too expensive in this world, making it difficult to obtain, and apologized for the lack of tea, but she smiled and suggested adding sugar to soften it. After this, she sipped the sweet drink and admitted that it was already safe to drink, but the young man warned her not to drink it before bed, otherwise she would have insomnia. Meanwhile, he chewed his food with a crunch, and she quietly snacked at a round table where several dishes stood. The girl inquired about his food, and then realized with horror that it might be poisonous. The boy explained that all brave boys were taught to eat monster meat from childhood. He added that early use allows one to get used to the taste, even if it leaves much to be desired, but in wartime it becomes indispensable, while his interlocutor responded quietly to his words. The young man asked why she was trying to do everything herself, and heard the explanation that there were almost no servants left. Most had died in the recent battle, although some could take up arms again. The narrative then shifted to a close-up of a boot firmly landing on the ground, and the girl noted that in the Brave clan, defeat without death was not considered a failure, because the main thing was to stubbornly survive and rise again. After that, he gently touched her head and said that in their house they were not ashamed of scars, but on the contrary, they were proud of them, calling Lady Alicia truly amazing. He then explained that the habit of carefully examining the soldier's wounds had become a habit with him, and he invited her, a little shyly, to walk with him, despite the disorder in the region and its natural beauty. She quietly remarked that human conflicts seemed petty next to the grandeur of nature, and he agreed, adding that it was here that people especially felt their insignificance. Then he firmly decided to set out on a journey, and when the girl asked him to show her these lands, he agreed with a joyful smile. Soon she stubbornly reminded him that she herself had mentioned the hike, even out of breath, and the guy replied that no one had warned her that the path would be so high in the mountains. The narrative clarified that Udana is a vast mountain range near the Brave holdings, rich in rare plants and minerals not found in the royal capital. She expected to see local goods or crafts, but the young man explained that there was nothing of the sort here. The settlement was harsh and served only as a haven for adventurers hunting monsters. Meanwhile, another man said with a sly smile that Seabass had dealt with those who had bet on his father's death, and this was discussed in a dark room by the armored men, where gambling was the only entertainment. The young owner apologized, calling the story inappropriate for a lady, but she assured him that it was normal and usual for her, and he silently remembered the bitter coffee. After this, he suggested a pause, noticing her efforts to adapt to foreign conditions, and then she, having caught her breath, sincerely praised the taste of the local food. The guy explained that in Udana, due to the altitude and low evaporation, the water retains its pristine purity and is much clearer than any in the capital, and she listened attentively. She fell into thought by the river and admitted to herself that although these lands were harsh, the more you learned about them, the easier it became to live. Next to him, he listened silently to her words. Afterwards, he spoke of the brave clan's teachings to understand enemies and allies in order to survive, and mentioned a similar proverb from a distant world. At dawn, 4 figures stood over a rocky cliff and reflected that everyone chooses their own destiny and fights for their own beliefs. The young man noted that the faces of the peasants here were strikingly different from the bad rumors he had heard before, and the girl quietly confirmed his observation. He then added that people in the brave lands were not inclined to laugh, but admitted that laughter was acceptable, since life here was an eternal game with death for the sake of survival. She urged them to cast aside their fatigue and move on, because the goal was already close, but he hesitated a little and asked them to wait. Finally, he challenged her by saying that if she forbade him to laugh, then let her tell him to laugh, and in response he heard that he was a strange man. At that moment their hands barely touched each other. The girl peered anxiously at the battlefield below, noticing how enemy troops were rapidly advancing across the rough terrain. After this she remained silent, immersed in her own thoughts, while the young man admired the surroundings and admitted that although the place seemed ordinary, it remained the most precious to him. He then suggested a light snack, reminding her that after a long walk she would probably feel hungry, and soon asked her a question, wanting to continue the conversation. They walked side by side, and the girl insisted that he could address her without using honorifics, but the guy sheepishly objected, and she gently assured him that such formalities were unnecessary. Then she called his name softly, and Ragna, after some hesitation, admitted that her words did indeed make sense. After a while, she stopped at the edge of the cliff and asked him what he would do if he had made a difficult decision and still felt regret, and the young man listened thoughtfully, wondering if time could heal such doubts. Elsewhere, a young man hurried through rocky terrain until he stood frozen in front of the fallen bodies, reflecting on how choosing one side always meant losing the other, and that it was impossible to regain what was lost. He wondered out loud what would be left if there was nothing left, and she, standing with her back to him, silently listened to his words. The girl admitted that she had dedicated her entire life to one goal and was now afraid of losing it, while he remained silent, standing nearby. She firmly stated that, as a duchess, she had already died, which was why she found herself in these godforsaken lands. Then the guy wondered if it was really impossible to break off such feelings, and she apologized for the unacceptable remark and bitterly cursed the demonic parasites. At this time, the butler told the young master that he was too clumsy and should learn to face trials fairly, and outside stood Alicia, whose name someone called out in an invisible voice. He then solemnly vowed to always protect her, and they stood face to face against the backdrop of a bright sunset, causing the girl to react with surprise and slight confusion. The young man assured Alicia that although the Duke's daughter was already a thing of the past, she now symbolized the House of Brave, and promised to protect her at any cost, and she admitted that she had rehearsed such pompous speeches. After this, he explained that he was engaged in some kind of image training, and she ironically decided that the efforts were in vain, and wondered what kind of nobleman could behave so stupidly. However, the guy was noticeably nervous when she softly admitted that she did not feel any rejection, finding his words simple and understandable, while at the same time she thought that perhaps she had been overcomplicating everything in her head. She then asked if he would be willing to protect her even at the academy, where hatred and hostility awaited them, and at that moment their little fingers touched against the backdrop of the sunset sky. He confidently replied that he could handle any danger and called out to Onyx cheerfully, causing her to react in surprise as she looked away. A huge dragon appeared above them, looming like a dark shadow, and one of the young men declared that the monster had witnessed Ragna Brave's oath. The young man then introduced the black dragon Onyx as his friend and explained that he wanted him to be the one to hear their vow, which left Alicia so shocked that she fell to the ground and burst into tears. The young man struggled to stay conscious as he addressed Alicia-sama, while the dragon loomed over him, and the narrative suggested that their first date had ended with many trials ahead. The girl then called Ragna with enthusiasm, noting that after this meeting they became closer, and he confirmed his essence with a slight smile. After this, they were struck by the disorder in the room, and one of those present recalled the oath given before the dragon, and another clarified whether he was referring to Onyx himself. Then the young man explained that Onyx was a monster that lived deep in the mountains, and his interlocutor calmly noted that the disappearance of the demonic parasites was due to his blessing. The young man recalled how he nearly died in an encounter with the creature, and another participant added that the master had once challenged Lord Onyx to a one-on-one duel, and the battle ended in a draw, after which he acknowledged his strength. Alicia tried to remain calm, while someone nearby reflected on their own panic in this place. Then the man mentioned the success of the negotiations, and the woman lying on the table recalled their constant string of surprises. He hesitated, explaining that even with his modern knowledge, the task would take time, but his interlocutor extended her hand and asked him to trust her. Meanwhile, the young man noticed a strange flow of money in the shop, while the girl asked Seabass to show her old documents, and he nodded, confirming that he had already finished checking the figures. After this, she calmly picked up a pen and concentrated on writing, while in the background the woman sighed with relief, assuring that the situation was now basically settled. The dark-haired youth praised his diligent companion, and the butler echoed his words. The maid listened silently while another man remarked that basic education was almost forgotten these days. He noted to himself that without the demonic parasites hanging over her, she could smile like a simple girl, and she looked at him with a soft gaze and a slight blush. Soon, a confident Alicia told Ragna that she intended to help with the cleaning of the mansion, which greatly surprised the maid and servant, who greeted her decision with alarm. Then she calmly explained that she now served the brave household as a simple assistant and wanted to try something she had never done before, and the young master and butler watched this with approval. The man with the mustache declared that he would harden his heart and leave some of the work to the young gentleman, who then remarked that the prices in the gun shop were excessively high, calling his interlocutor a demon. Having taken the documents, the young man came to the conclusion that the newcomers arrived from the capital city and opened a gun shop on the same day that Alicia appeared. The narrative explained that weapons were consumables that rarely yielded much profit, and that true relics could only be obtained in the capital. While the men discussed this royal style of business, one of them asked the owner what he intended to do, adding that they had their eye on Alicia. Later, a young man peeked out cautiously from around a corner in the village at night, then stepped out of the shadows and said decisively that he was going to tear it out by the roots. He asked where the information had come from, and the older man warned him to be careful, mentioning that, according to the adventurer, there were skilled warriors nearby. The angry interlocutor then explained that he had attempted to steal something valuable out of irritation with their arrogant trading methods, but had ended up losing his right hand without even noticing the blade's movement. The young man stood by the stone building, thinking about how the local adventurers were capable of cutting off limbs without drawing a sword. The robed figure raised his staff and began to explain that the entire world was permeated with magical energy, and those who could control it were called sorcerers. Then they showed a young man who said that during the war, those who suffered the most were those who encountered enemy mages, and Alicia was among their targets. The man then kicked the door down hard, startling the three people inside. They didn't recognize him at first, but soon realized it was Ragna Brave standing before them and demanded to know why he had come. Then the dark-haired youth calmly accused them of sneaking around their territory, and added that he would not act harshly if he heard a convincing explanation. A tense group of armed men surrounded the young man, and he, keeping his cool, concluded that they were preparing to engage in battle right in front of the master. One of the men with a sword hastened to declare that he had not touched the young man, while the other suggested that they remove the witness quietly, so that they would not be caught with weapons in their hands. 3 fighters surrounded the calm guy, declaring that he had come alone in vain, and prepared to attack. At that very moment, the young man easily dodged the blow and called his opponent weak, after which he forcefully threw him to the ground. He then noticed 2 people unconscious on the floor, and a hooded figure emerged from the shadows, clapping its hands and admiring his strength, reminding him that he was only 15 years old. The hooded stranger politely asked permission to ask a question, while the young man thought about Lady Alicia's condition. The ominous silhouette mockingly declared that the girl was already succumbing to the influence of their gift, and behind him a monster with long hair and insect-like eyes grew. The man then furiously attacked the shrouded woman, accusing her of sending demonic parasites again and again, and she only grimaced when he promised to teach her a lesson. The woman still objected that all the inhabitants of the estate loved her and she lived there happily, but suddenly the attacker struck with a powerful mantis technique, laughing as he rushed forward. The attacker was stunned and could not believe that Lady Alicia was actually capable of living freely and smiling. The determined young man declared that he had been conveying his feelings to her every day and had no intention of letting her go, while the other one immediately decided to check everything out, and a fierce battle broke out between them. One of the fighters struck and explained that this was retribution for the adventurer's hand and for the scent creatures, and then threatened to spare his life only if the real customer was named. After this, the other man admitted that the Duke's line was dangerous and quickly attacked, adding that he was doing this out of revenge for the suffering he had caused Alicia. The young man calmly told Seabass that he himself was cursed and asked him to deal with the consequences, to which the butler agreed without hesitation. The young master then inquired whether it would be possible to arrange for her to live with him at the academy under the same roof, but the older servant misinterpreted this and thought of an inheritance, which the young man immediately denied. After clarifying that it was merely a matter of protection, the older man nodded in agreement. Later, the young man walked through the quiet village at night and wondered when his heart had stopped feeling anything, wondering if he would be able to find his place in the academy after avenging his father. The girl studied the records about the academy and wondered if this information was enough, and then decided to warn Ragna before dusk completely covered the building. Meanwhile, Alicia tended the garden alone and lamented that she wouldn't have time to harvest the daikon before leaving for the capital tomorrow, while those around her watched her efforts in amazement. Inside the house, one woman was sweeping the floor, others were cleaning and cooking, while the man and his companion quietly sipped tea. The girl, looking at them with admiration, thought about how their energy was now being spent not on studying, but on everyday chores. The child then clung to the young man's leg and begged him not to leave, while the others watched silently. The maids and the two men discussed the need for the heir to attend the academy, while Lady Alicia could very well remain at the estate, demonstrating the difference in their status. Maria said that the vegetables would be delivered to the academy when they were ripe, but the girl stubbornly insisted that they should all be eaten together right there on the estate. Soon the maid handed over the collar and explained that it was used to punish the heir for his antics, which left the girl surprised and embarrassed, not knowing how to react. As the carriage wheels rumbled along the road, someone warned the young man to beware of colds and to eat vegetables, while another added that if anything happened to Alicia, he would have to wash the floors as punishment. Then Alicia noticed that Ragna was genuinely loved by everyone around her, and admitted that she was a little jealous of this, while the blonde next to her smiled softly and laughed quietly. The young man awkwardly admitted that this was his first time traveling outside his land, and his elderly companion listened attentively to his confession. On the way, the young man chatted cheerfully with the girl and two men who were bandaging his injured leg, while the woman watched from the side. Afterward, he quietly announced his departure, and the carriage was already waiting for him at the entrance. The travelers approached a rise, and one of the men pointed to the capital in the distance. The serious young man listened attentively, and then Alicia admitted that her request sounded pathetic, but she still dared to voice it. She asked to be shown how to buy a ticket at the station, and then timidly added that she wanted to learn how to use the train. After this, the girl confidently said that she would take care of Ragna's first appearance in public herself, and he, embarrassed, asked her to at least not laugh. Lieselot smiled softly and jokingly suggested putting on a collar so as not to get lost in the crowded capital, but Julian refused and asked what kind of performance they were putting on. The city of Ether appeared as a majestic capital with a population of over 1 million people, protected by a barrier that, according to legend, was created by an ancient sage. The young man remarked that there were almost no monsters and no wars here, which is why everyone flocked to this place, and Alicia replied that compared to their home, it seemed cramped. The girl clarified that there were separate dormitories for boys and girls on the academy's grounds, and her companion was eagerly awaiting the opportunity to see them. But soon they found themselves in front of a dilapidated building, and the two gazed at it in silence. The boy exclaimed in shock when he saw the conditions they would have to live in, and couldn't believe they would accommodate both sexes. Later, the girl showed Ragna a letter that spoke of a distant place outside the school, and he wondered out loud what it could mean. The girl thoughtfully shuffled through the papers while the man and woman discussed how living in a dilapidated dormitory and the humiliation that came with it should convince the disgruntled aristocrats, and the other woman added that Seabass had already spread these rumors widely. The young man noted that cleaning was necessary, but the emptiness of the premises was convenient, to which his companion agreed and added that vegetables could be grown in the yard. Then he clenched his fist sharply, hearing a voice informing him of the young master's belongings in his room. He later explained to the blonde that he only wanted to ensure their shared accommodation, and she looked at him in bewilderment. After this, the man wished the heir good luck and reminded him that in order to enter the same upper class where Lady Alicia would be, he must successfully pass the exam. The boy pondered his chances of success, and soon the scene changed to that of a majestic academy, where the children of nobility gathered, and classes were divided according to class. It was further explained that the possibility of marriage depended directly on rank. Representatives of the upper classes could tie themselves to the royal family, while those of the lower classes could not. The story continued to suggest that commoners with exceptional magic or knowledge had the right to act as the descendants of sages. At this point, the hero imagined vague images of his upcoming school life. He stood with his arms crossed as the girl firmly stated that they were nobles from distant lands and a fallen aristocrat, but her resolve was unwavering. She then suggested that if it came to a test of skill, they could prevail, and as he listened attentively, she confidently walked outside. The stern man reproached the young aristocrat for keeping the high-class teacher waiting, and he awkwardly apologized with a forced smile, admitting that it was his first time there. The stern mentor then scolded the young man for his slowness and ordered him to begin with a basic test of magic, ordering him to fire at maximum power at the target. The young man cautiously asked if there were any special requirements for magic, but the elderly examiner snapped that there were none and hurried him on, while the young man doubtfully asked why he should be the one conducting the test. At that moment, the muscular man in torn clothes heard a sudden noise and turned around in surprise, noticing how the wall behind him began to crack and crumble. The strong warrior frowned, wondering who this mysterious participant was and what had happened, while another student anxiously asked the mentor if he had passed the test, and someone nearby remarked that more tests lay ahead. The strict examiner told the young man that, regardless of his level of magic, he would never advance further, and at that very moment the boy caught the wooden sword in surprise. The man then announced that the next test would be fencing, and explained that defeating him would be the condition for successfully passing the test. The senior mentor warned that the use of magic was strictly forbidden, and defeat was considered the moment the opponent could no longer fight. The young man agreed to end the fight quickly, prompting an irritated insult from the older man. Soon, the young man broke the wooden sword and noticed that his opponent's weapon had a metal rod inside, while his was merely a simple piece of wood. A fallen figure lay nearby on the ground. The young participant asked incredulously if his opponent had deliberately tried to defeat him, since he couldn't fight without a weapon. In response, the opponent merely noted that his sword had broken. A man named Vorzia Grand Cascade, the director of the academy, appeared, and the young man responded with obvious excitement to his questions about what had happened. In the end, he hesitantly confirmed to the stern headmaster that the transfer exam was indeed taking place today. The dark-haired youth stepped aside, while the one with long, fair hair watched him and thought about the sage from the ducal family, imagining what kind of problems would arise if he paid attention to him. The older man then silently assessed the young participant and declared him a success. The young man accepted this decision with surprise and gratitude, and the mentor explained that the difference in their genders was actually minimal. After this, the older man asked him if he wished to join the upper class. The young man replied that he had no strong desire, but hinted that he had other considerations. Then the heir firmly declared that he was obliged to protect someone here. The older man nodded gravely, confirming his resolve. The stern man officially acknowledged his enrollment in the privileged class, but another objected, pointing to the boy's birth in forgotten lands and his bride, who had already caused quite a few scandals. The elderly mentor angrily called his opponent a fool, causing him to flinch. He then demanded the young man identify himself. The heir admitted he was only a teacher and quickly apologized. Afterwards, the young man was reminded that he needed to maintain proper relations, as a special permit had allowed him to use the dormitory. At that moment, a voice called out the name Ragnar Brave. Then the boy thought about how the main character had once been helped to rise to a new level, and in the background, an elderly mentor and a woman were already announcing their return home. The girl ran up to Ragnar, worried, and asked if everything was okay and if anyone had said anything strange to him. He, with a strained smile, assured her that he was fine. He soon proudly announced his success, noting that the test had been challenging, but his efforts had been rewarded. His companion, however, asked in surprise what exactly had happened. He pondered for a while about the mysterious magic-related illness she had mentioned, and finally asked her directly for details. The boy then remarked that he'd mastered all the basic spells, but found it difficult to explain them fully. The girl listened silently, holding a round object in her hands, as he began to describe his most powerful ability. Finally, she awkwardly suggested dinner, emphasizing that they needed to be well-fed, as they had a lot of work to do at the academy the next day. The young man then asked her to warn him about unpleasant people in advance, but she reminded him that violence was strictly prohibited. After that, Alicia admitted that she didn't pay attention to other people's words, because he was there. The girl turned around as if asking a question, and off-screen a voice could be heard reflecting on the weight of mental pain and self-awareness, rare even among seasoned warriors. She then pointed to the scar on Ragna's face from the duel, while passers-by whispered about the man next to her. The young man calmly asked her to maintain peace, despite his doubts about the future of Alice's wedding. At this time, another young man with short hair was thinking about making the girl his concubine because of her fallen position, and his face became tense and serious. Alicia stopped Ragna abruptly, but he only responded with a careless sound, while panic arose around him because someone had suddenly lost consciousness. The young man admitted he'd only released a slight burst of murderous intent. The other wondered if the protagonist could awaken as a saint and doubted the strength of the people from the mainland. An image of a beautiful girl, reminiscent of the clear blue sky, came to mind, and then he realized that the real problem lay in Mariana Ocean, saying the name with a serious expression. She explained that most often the sage used magic without any element, and to master it, it was necessary to reach the pinnacle of the art of emptiness. Then the girl with glasses praised the young man for the correct answer to the tricky question and called him the sage's student, while another student nearby only smiled confidently. At that moment, one of the girls realized she was the heroine of an otome game, noticed a crack in her glasses, and regretted not choosing a closer seat. A man nearby noted her polite refusals and constant movement. After this, the neighbor offered to change places, but the heroine awkwardly declined, assuring that she could manage on her own, thanked her, and sighed with slight sadness. Soon, the stern teacher announced that Mariana Ocean would be sitting at the front of the room. The girl, flustered, began apologizing, while the young man quietly thought about Alicia. On a free day, one of his acquaintances asked him who he had fought, but the guy evasively replied that it was better not to touch the past, calling those who delved into it useless. At that moment, he swung his hand sharply, and a resounding thud echoed through the hall. The girl only looked calmly up at the ceiling, where a gaping hole lay. She screamed when a section of the ceiling collapsed nearby, then explained it was a hidden barrier. The young man noted the serious damage and said he would fix it later. Then he explained that he used a transparent shield with a sacred attribute, similar to the protective dome around the capital. The girl listened attentively and asked if he could cast spells without incantations, to which he confirmed that it was very convenient. He then explained that most people think of barriers as simple walls, and showed a glowing rectangular outline as an example. The girl was surprised to hear that even without a silent spell, he could make the form flexible, demonstrating this while pouring tea. She watched in amazement as a floating cup appeared before her, and the young man explained the difference between normal barriers and those used in the royal capital. Then Lieselot thoughtfully noted that magic could allow one to choose what exactly could pass through the barrier, looking at the diagram with a person passing through the barrier. In response, he explained that advanced shields can indeed be customized, deciding what to allow in and what not. The girl added that not everything can be separated, reminding him of the sugar in his coffee. Afterwards, they discussed Alicia's coffee bean supply running low. She then sheepishly asked if he wanted to go out later. They were leisurely walking down a quiet street when the young man mentioned he knew a place with excellent coffee. The girl wondered how he'd gotten such connections in such a situation. She recalled how a man approached her at lunch in the library one day, and they became friends over coffee. That's when she was told about this place. Soon they arrived at a specialty coffee shop called Ocean. The young man wondered with disbelief if this was really the same establishment, and the door gave a melodic chime. Inside, the girl with glasses initially mistook him for Alicia, but the dark-haired guy assured Mariana that he was nearby, explaining that he had simply lingered at the entrance, which caused slight confusion. Another girl appeared on the stairs and introduced herself as Ragna. The guy below remarked that she clearly liked coffee too much, and she shyly responded with a modest greeting. The young man then asked the girl if they were in the same class, to which she replied that they had never spoken before. Meanwhile, the bespectacled girl silently watched the proceedings. After this, the same owner of glasses awkwardly apologized, expressing bewilderment that a representative of a noble family was among them, and anxiously asked why Alicia was next to him. The girl timidly asked whether she was facing execution, but the man hastened to reassure her. Meanwhile, another woman bowed low, apologizing for not recognizing his noble status. Later, in a quiet cafe, the girl with glasses regretted her outburst and apologized again. However, the other woman assured Alicia it wasn't her fault and took responsibility for speaking up first. Meanwhile, the girl with glasses pensively sipped her coffee, recalling how she had once mistaken Alicia for a commoner similar to herself. At the same time, Alicia stood nearby by the library shelves. The young man then noted to himself that in this world, coffee was considered a drink for commoners, though he enjoyed it. The girl, however, suggested that the sage would have 2 disciples this year, which made him wonder if there was anyone else he didn't know about. Afterwards, she asked if he realized the uproar his actions had caused. He confirmed he hadn't, and she questioned why Alicia had acted alone and why he hadn't heard anything about the controversy surrounding the decision. The girl with the glasses soon realized they weren't in the capital at all. Then the other girl explained that she'd mistakenly boarded the wrong carriage, the one taking them to the academy. The young man began to wonder why the carriage had gone elsewhere on such an important day, wondering if it was a coincidence. She listened attentively, and the girl behind the counter added that, despite his reputation as a magical genius, he seemed a little absent-minded. After this, the girl with glasses confidently admitted that she was good at magic, but useless at everything else. The young man responded by cautiously inquiring about her parents. Then she told him with quiet sadness that she had lost them a year ago due to illness, and the young man quickly apologized to his neighbor for his carelessness. Soon Maria politely offered coffee, reminding them that it was she who had invited them, although she had not yet served anything. Lieselot then admired Mariana's work, emphasizing that her approach was very different from Ragna's. He agreed, and Mariana smiled shyly in response. Then the older man remarked on the bitterness of the coffee brewed from the same beans. 2 maids asked if this was a metaphor for the young master's life, and the girl assured Mariana it was just a joke. The young man then unexpectedly declared that he would call her his mentor, causing her surprise. The girl with glasses admitted it was strange to see 2 noblemen who didn't seem at all intimidating. At that moment, the man and woman sat down next to each other, and she recalled a vague episode and wondered about a possible allergy to nobility. Then she remembered how, as a child, a neighbor boy had warned her that even the slightest disobedience to the nobles could cost her life. After this, a moment came to mind when, during the rain, she found herself under the wheels of a nobleman's carriage and lay wounded, and the carriage drove away without showing the slightest compassion. Later, the family was drinking coffee at the table, and the girl explained that her parents became interested in the drink when they heard that it improved her eyesight after she began having problems due to an accident. She recalled how soon the entire family had become true coffee lovers. The 2 listened silently, and then the girl with the braid confidently named her main skill when the conversation turned to magic. At that moment, one of the people present was surprised to hear the explanation that healing magic could restore people. The man confirmed its rarity, turning to the woman next to him. In this world, only a few are able to use healing magic on others, but in a famous story, Saint Mariana could cure diseases, exorcise demons, and even restore lost limbs. Then she remembered how she hadn't been able to help her sick parents a year ago, and admitted to herself that she had studied diligently to save her loved ones in the future. At that moment, 2 girls noticed the empty establishment. Afterwards, the young man apologized for being the last one in and closed the door behind him. The girl angrily demanded that it be opened immediately, accusing him of interfering with business. Meanwhile, the bespectacled woman hastened to reassure everyone, explaining that she had recently been completely focused on her studies and had closed the shop herself for the holidays. 2 figures in the background listened attentively to her words. Later, Mariana was asked if she would be staying in the dormitory, to which she replied that she preferred to live at home. Another man thanked them both for the past day and mentioned that the children of a sage are entitled to special privileges. The man then clarified that living expenses and tuition would be covered,
provided she achieved outstanding grades. The bespectacled girl smiled and was advised to report any difficulties to the academy. She thanked him, adding that those words alone were enough. Another girl admired her radiance and called what she said unusually bright. Soon, one of the girls politely asked Ragna to give her Alicia, but he firmly refused. Another observer standing nearby looked puzzled and irritated by their conversation. Then the long-haired girl tried to cheer up the boy next to her, assuring him that she was still a good girl. They stood by the buildings under a gloomy sky. A girl in glasses recalled an encounter with a man whose eyes were as direct and clear as her own. Meanwhile, another listener carefully took note of every word, pen and notebook in hand. She asked him if he'd ever met anyone with such a strong inner core. The young man agreed, and the two of them continued on their way, strolling through the city in the sunset lights. Under the moonlight, he complimented her determined gaze and attractiveness. She sheepishly denied pretending to be someone else, and a light flirtation ensued. After this, the owner of long hair told her interlocutor that she was just a commoner and a villain, while the latter looked worried. Then both found themselves on a snowy battlefield, where two girls clashed in a duel, and an icy wind swirled around them, foreshadowing the inevitable death of one of the sides. Soon they were sitting at the table, sharing a meal. One admired Alicia's sandwich, while the other, without hesitation, offered to share it. Meanwhile, the girl with the hairpins reflected on the beauty of harmony among friends. Her two companions listened to her words and smiled under the slightly cloudy sky. The young man then anxiously wondered how things had come to this. The bespectacled girl, on the other hand, wondered where Ragna had disappeared to. He'd vanished right after recess, even though he'd always taken his classes seriously. He was also thinking about the fact that now, next to him, was the one who had once been rejected and abandoned in the wasteland. This would likely only increase the number of reproaches. At that moment, the noble girl carefully wiped the tears from the hero's face. He wondered how fate had allowed them to become so close, while the man standing next to him silently resigned himself to his role as a supporting player. In the original version of the story, Alicia lost the duel and was exiled to the borderlands, while Mariana, remaining a simple city dweller, calmly continued her studies and life at the academy. He reflected on the fact that Mariana was not his real opponent as he crouched on the cracked ground from which long ropes stretched. Then she sank to her knees, exhausted, and wondered out loud who had managed to defeat Alicia. A silhouette stood motionless before her. After this, the heir to the throne admitted that it was he who provoked the duel, and asked with interest what was going on, while the dark-skinned figure anxiously clung to him. Meanwhile, the young man decided to watch from the roof and noticed a crowd below joyfully shouting Edward's name. A little later, Edward himself politely asked if he could share lunch with her, but she declined, reminding him she had already made a promise to someone else. At this point, one of the onlookers noted that Alicia had previously been his fiancée. The narration explained that the prince route was considered the classic route in the game, but then asked why, hinting at a future explanation. The prince, introduced as a gentle test and a teaching character, greeted someone again with a confident smile, making it clear that their acquaintance was continuing. The young man pondered the idea that, according to the plot, the heroine should strengthen her bond with the protagonist. At that moment, one of the aristocrats apologized for the wait and approached the meeting. He was stunned, not understanding who the stranger was. The girl, however, curtsied gracefully and calmly stated that she had just arrived, addressing him as His Highness. Then the interlocutor respectfully remarked that it was a great honor for him, but she corrected him, reminding him that she should address him simply by his first name Edward. She remembered how he called her by name during their first meeting within the city walls, even before entering the academy, and the young man himself looked at her with a serious gaze. The girl admitted that she had not previously known about his royal origins, and he noted to himself that fate itself had brought them together again within the walls of the academy. For a moment she hesitated, embarrassed, but soon he gently asked her to call him by his first name rather than by his title, and at the same time he smiled with genuine warmth. Then the blushing girl barely audibly said Edward's name, clasping her hands in front of her face, while flower petals fell around her. At that moment, the young man realized with surprise that there was no character named Patricia in the game at all, and the girl herself wondered if she had taken Mariana's place. Soon the four young men gathered together. One resolutely declared that he would not allow the others to get ahead of him, the second reminded them of himself,
and the third dismissively noted Patricia's bad character. Then the boy realized with unexpected excitement that they were all potential romantic interests. The girl joyfully invited everyone to dinner, and 5 young men surrounded her, creating the atmosphere of a lively reverse harem. He noticed that Patricia was probably having a hard time, but she simply asked the young men to behave more restrainedly, after which, with a cheerful smile, she offered them more food. It gradually became clear that she was the one taking over the role of the main character, because such a reverse harem scene meant that all the romantic flags were activated in the men around her. 2 young men discussed the difficulty of maintaining relationships with multiple partners, noting that every heir to the family line is obliged to have a bride. Then one of those present indifferently decided to stay away from the reverse harem, while a mysterious figure lay motionless nearby, hinting at a strange death after release. After that, he quietly confirmed to himself that there was only one person who absolutely needed to be watched closely, as he had previously suspected. At this time, Jalasis Gran Ignite noticed that the meals here were much tastier than in the dining hall, and the young man sitting next to him excitedly recognized him as the second son of the Ignite family. Later, 2 men sitting on a bench approached the mysterious girl and asked if she had heard about the mage who had caused a stir in the Bravelands. Then she remembered the wayward boy, born as insurance for Ignite's eldest son, and her interlocutor carefully advised her to remain calm and not to rush into things thoughtlessly. After a moment, they linked arms, forming a circle, and the narrator noted that this route represented a dark story about attempts to save Jalasis and others from complex family ties. Meanwhile, another young man thought about the person whose behavior changed depending on the choice, and, watching from above, noted that although the goal was known, the meeting had not yet taken place, so he decided to postpone the intervention. Then the determined boy thought about preventing the coming disaster, while the girl expressed her wish for Alicia to live in peace, but someone's voice immediately reproached them for their secrecy. After this, the older man turned to Valze, asking why he had come and warning him about the dangers of being on the roof. The young man merely listened silently, his expression serious. A little later, the young man noticed that the moment was perfect to ask a question, and at that moment, the center of attention was drawn to the girl with the headband and unnatural dark roots under her light hair, called the core of the impossible reverse harem. Then a young man in a suit asked the elder to tell him about a student named Patricia, revealing that she was a reincarnator just like himself. The girl asked the boy to tell her everything about Patricia, her origins, her past, and her magical abilities, while the elder listened with genuine attention. However, the wearer of the armband herself resolutely denied the accusations of secret machinations, and another interlocutor stood up for her, noting that she had honestly passed the entrance exam. Later, she sensed something was wrong while looking down on the city from above, and thought the hero had been deliberately separated during the events. The girl suspected that a noble family might have been involved in the carriage substitution. The cloaked figure soon suggested that the threat came from the Ignite family, and the bearded man cautiously agreed, emphasizing that it was better to allow their training for now until their intentions became clear. Then the young man sighed with relief, saying that it would be wonderful to live in peace, and his interlocutor quietly confirmed that this was indeed the case. Afterwards, the older man told the young man he had the right to enjoy his youth at the academy and asked why he lived within such constraints. He replied that he would endure 3 years for the sake of duty. After all, he was a nobleman from a forgotten land. Then the young man smiled warmly and asked if the pride of the Brave clan had been forgotten. In response, one of the men clenched his fist, and the other, long-haired and bearded, noted that the blood of the brave does not give in even in harsh conditions, continuing to resist until the last breath. The older man with long hair questioned whether someone's resolve was really that weak, his gaze sharp and challenging. Then the dark-haired youth suddenly struck the silver-haired opponent straight in the face, and the sound of the collision was deafening. After this, a powerful force burst through the wall, and the figure with long hair stood still while those around reacted in fear to the rumble of the earth and the chaos that erupted. Meanwhile, the young man sternly warned the elder that he would not forgive any harm to Alicia, emphasizing that he didn't care if it was his personal garden. In response, the man calmly remarked that this was precisely the outcome he had been seeking. The one-eyed old man then challenged Ragnabrave to prove his wishes and asked if he believed in fate. After that, he mentioned Mariana Ocean, and the young man sarcastically questioned the idea of fate, calling it a bad script. At that moment, the girl with glasses was described as having a strong destiny, but she was already distorted and plunging into madness, while the man stood behind and watched thoughtfully. Then she thought that soon the conflict would draw in all the academy's students with powerful destinies, and the country would probably split into light and darkness. After this, someone decisively declared that it was necessary to protect Mariana, who had lost her guardian, while she herself silently admitted that she did not have the strength to resist now. The man with long hair declared that her destiny was not limited to this world, but lay somewhere else, and the scene changed to snow-capped mountains. Then she nervously clenched her fists, admitting to feeling uneasy. Meanwhile, he wondered how much Valzia understood about the concept of defense, and clarified that this was Mariana's first dungeon. The young man later admitted he was afraid while the others were preparing for a training trip to the dungeon, where they would be putting the magic they learned in class to practical use. Despite the safety precautions, the possibility of injury remained. Patricia admitted her weakness and thanked Edward, who assured her of his protection. Meanwhile, someone noted that the dungeon was merely a means to closer the goal of conquest. The young man then asked what they were going to do with the imposter, and the other two began to talk about a secret event connected with a sacred relic hidden in the depths. Soon, a confident woman appeared, apologized for the delay, and encouraged them to move on. One of the men excitedly noted her battle-hardened appearance and her excitement for the challenge. Meanwhile, the same woman mockingly ridiculed the commoner for trying to gain the trust of the academy, and the person standing next to her warmly supported her words. The boy then remembered the girl who had been with Alicia before and scornfully ridiculed her training while the others watched the many commoners pretending to be nobles. The noblewoman declared the academy was created for nobles, and insulted the others, calling them filthy creatures. She then suggested expelling them, causing the fair-haired girl to look shocked and tense. The man then turned to Alicia with concern, and the confident woman asked what was wrong. At that moment, the girl angrily accused Catherine of allowing the commoners to commit lawlessness at the academy. However, Ekaterina admitted that she deserved to be hated, and the other two girls in uniform stated that she could not be accused of anything and that she had nothing to do with it. A confident woman told the entire group that if anyone had any doubts, a desire to challenge someone to a duel, or anything else, they could feel free to ask. She then added a phrase clearly directed at one of those present. Then the girl with glasses warned her rival that she should not count on winning against the sage's students or herself. After this, the mocking figure told the others to waste their lives on coffee, as if they were building a monkey mountain. One of the participants reacted sharply, his gaze flashing with anger. However, she smiled warmly and explained that she drank it simply because she loved the drink. Meanwhile, a group of soldiers smelled the beans with obvious displeasure. One irritably demanded they move on, while a man standing nearby merely quietly remarked that he had expected this. At that moment, Alicia acknowledged that she had gotten involved with an unusual person and apologized. Someone nearby silently remarked on her inner strength. He then admitted that he eventually began to feel sympathy for her and felt stronger because of it, but the girl rejected his words, saying that he was only looking decent. They allowed themselves to joke about Alicia's damage and whether she should be eliminated, but they were quickly reprimanded. After that, the scene changed. In the stone cave, a thoughtful girl adjusted her glasses and stepped forward. Soon the group entered a dungeon, the walls of which sparkled with crystals. One of them remarked that they had finally arrived, and then the scene changed to a cheerful girl describing how traps and monsters constantly attack them. Then she anxiously asked if Ragnar was okay after he dodged the blow. He calmly reassured her, explaining that a protective barrier a few millimeters thick always surrounded his body. After this, he recalled an old experience when he was close to death, and explained that covering the entire body with a barrier means gaining strength born from the desire to overcome fear. The determined young man added that he had trained endlessly and could now perform the move instinctively, while the three concentrated men listened and the archers readied their arrows. Then the girl with short red hair assured the guy that this place was truly beautiful. Meanwhile, the other two argued about whether this was truly a scary or, on the contrary, a brave place. She mentioned that she was going home for the summer holidays with Ragnar and invited him to join her. He readily agreed, and she suggested mountain training as a great opportunity. After this, the cheerful young man proclaimed the start of Camp Bravestyle, promising that everyone would master non-spell-based magic. Two girls watched him with curious glances. In response, one of them happily declared that she was happy to be learning, while the other assured her not to worry and took responsibility. Then she pondered the strange nature of what was happening. They then wondered why the monsters in the dungeon were disappearing without leaving bodies. The girl explained that this place was created by ancient sages and held many secrets, and then suggested removing some soil from the wall to find the answer. At that moment, the girl suddenly created a powerful magic circle, which startled two observers, who asked if she had committed a mad act. Then one of them called out to Mariana, and the man wondered aloud what lay beyond this step.
Mariana herself looked tense and focused. Finally, they entered ancient ruins, immersed in darkness.
Ruined columns towered around them, and someone asked what this place was, while another carried two unconscious comrades in his arms. The boy remarked that the landscape seemed familiar and assumed they were on the very bottom level. The girl reacted with surprise, and he wondered about the possibility of a teleportation trap while she admired the majestic wall. Then Maria snatched the pickaxe from her friend and warned her that personal safety was her primary concern. She jokingly added that if she died here, she'd never get a chance to drink coffee again.
Soon Liselot pulled out a mug and poured coffee, offering it to her. Eleanor asked in amazement where she got such a supply and why she even carried it around.
After this, Liselot explained that it was always important to take food with you into the dungeon. The listener agreed with her reasoning and decided to indulge in some while they prepared together. He noted with relief that both remained calm. Then he remembered that falling to the bottom of a dungeon usually meant the end of the game, no help came, and the monsters couldn't be eaten. Then the girl warned that the situation was extremely dangerous and admitted that they hadn't taught her about this place in class.
The boy calmly asked if she knew anything more.
The young man assured Alicia that everything would be fine and promised that as soon as they caught their breath, they would immediately head to the very depths where something could be done. Meanwhile, one of the girls began to wonder if Alicia was the villain in the game and wondered who she really was.
Meanwhile, the two men stood on a glowing magic circle surrounded by fluttering butterflies.
It soon became clear that the deepest chamber contained a sacred relic, essential to awakening the saint and saving the country. So they decided to follow each character's chosen route to retrieve it. He explained that all it took was defeating the golem guarding the door. He then added that there was a teleportation circle nearby that led to the exit. The young man clarified that defeating the guardian of the deepest level would allow him to return. Two women listened dubiously, and the third pointed out how difficult this task would be. The girl joyfully spotted a possible exit, while the young man noted the absence of a golem in front of the door. His armored companion watched everything with keen interest. Soon, Mariana stood resolutely before the enormous and ominous creature. The man next to her screamed her name in horror. Both felt a colossal magical energy, reminiscent of the sun itself, and began to wonder whether it belonged to a dragon, Fenrir, or some other entity. Then he ordered everyone to step back, explaining that he did not want to get too close to the demon, the creature to whom Alicia had entrusted her own soul almost at the end of the story. The girl spun around sharply, clutching the knife, and the boy nervously called her name. At that moment, she realized the duel was over, and victory was Patricia's. She was then harshly scolded for losing to a commoner, calling it a disgrace, while she struggled to hold back her tears and felt completely helpless. She turned around in confusion and called out to Ragna, who was running ahead. He ordered his two companions to remain where they were and cast the Aqua Veil spell. The young man vowed to destroy the monster in charge, warning it would pay for his fiancée's injury. In response, the creature burst into a sinister laugh. He noticed the object begin to shrink and instantly dodged a powerful spinning blow aimed straight at him. The dark-haired youth swung his sword furiously, creating a powerful whirlwind and preparing to strike again. His face reflected determination and confidence. Then the massive creature was struck from behind and decapitated. Two girls watched, one joyfully exclaimed victory, the other calmly protested. After this, the monster repeated that something had fallen, and its neck snapped. A man nearby noted that even such damage was insufficient to destroy it and wondered why it continued to resist. The young man challenged the monster to strike and at the same moment counterattacked with a powerful kick, sending the beast flying into the rubble. He then harshly criticized the enemy's weak defense, calling it unworthy of even the lowest of the brave clan, while the latter wondered if he had been careless.
At that moment, two girls shouted Ragna's name, and the sharp-toothed monster growled in confusion and ordered the fire. The boy watched silently from the side. Then the dark-haired boy asked what was going on and noticed that the fire dragon's breath was much hotter. In response, the monster let out a sharp scream. The man asked who was hiding inside, wanting information. The woman explained that demons have no physical form and that only the person who made the deal can fulfill their wishes. The glove then extended toward the glowing magical aura. The man dared to touch it to determine the source of the power. Soon, the powerful creature screamed in pain as the man jumped onto its shoulder. He urgently announced that the monster had begun the process of self-destruction. Meanwhile, two armored warriors struggled to stay in place as the ground beneath them erupted violently. One of them cried out that he could no longer hold on. The young man slammed the ground hard, causing a devastating shockwave. The two girls behind him shielded themselves from the flying debris and barely managed to stay on their feet. The man knelt down and asked himself with frustration who had been overseeing all of this. Two women rushed to check on Ragna. One noticed the burn he had underestimated, while the other assured him she would keep her promise and protect him. Then he saw that Alicia had come to her senses, and felt a sense of relief. She thanked him with a soft, thoughtful look. Afterwards, the girl asked him what was wrong, noticing him standing there with his back turned. Two uniformed men nearby silently watched the proceedings. The boy explained that during the fight he'd noticed a teleportation circle. He believed it would allow them to escape to the surface, and this news surprised his companion. Then the determined young man sensed a powerful magical force and promised to find its source. The chaotic atmosphere of the dungeon hinted at a mortal battle to come. In the opulent hall, a young man coughed faintly, flames flickering around him. He complained about the filth and chaos that reigned after his training in the dungeon. The girl coldly called Jalasis pathetic and asked if he had retrieved the sacred artifact. In response, he nervously muttered Patricia's name. Then the angry girl slapped the young man and called him an idiot. He quietly apologized, but was immediately reprimanded for failing even under the demon's power. The young man explained that Ragna Brave had interrupted him, while the other thought that this stubborn ruler of the borderlands would sooner or later disappear into thin air. The woman merely waved him off dismissively. She then blamed him for the failure and regretted that her plan to turn Alicia into a villain had crumbled to dust. Afterwards, she announced that Edward's path was no longer accessible, adding that her former allies had proven useless, despite their family's blackmail. At that moment, another noticed Patricia's blood and offered to heal her. The girl sharply ordered him to take off his clothes, not accepting any objections, and soon the scene changed to a luxurious room, where she clarified where exactly he received the wound. The man awkwardly touched his neck as he handed over the item, and the determined girl pondered how this fellow reincarnator had been decapitated with one blow and how he had dared to do such a thing. They then discussed how his self-destruction had affected his entire body and wondered what would come next, comparing his circumstances to her own. The girl praised the young man for his impressive victory and effort, gently touching his head. He thanked her shyly, and she smiled warmly, calling him by name and hugging him. After that, the other one hugged her younger brother, calling him a crybaby and a winner, remembering that from birth he carried a demon inside him, just like her. She gently told the boy that for now he could consider her his big sister. He nervously grabbed her sleeve and called her just that. Then she consoled him, and he admitted that he could not defeat a strong opponent, expressing despair and doubts in his own strength. Lieselot coldly remarked that the child had always been a crybaby and asked what he was trying to achieve as he knelt before her in the richly decorated hall. At this time, the young man was anxiously holding his head, and the calm long-haired girl quietly admitted that she wanted to get Alicia. Then another one, with a fiery gaze, declared his desire to possess the girl even at the cost of destruction and decided to chain her forever, if only they would be together. He hesitated, but she reminded him that to possess her, he must first destroy the man to whom she belonged. Afterward, she encouraged him, urging him to believe in himself and continue on his journey. He then promised to try his best and win next time, and at that very moment he felt a flow of magic around him, while she watched silently with a thoughtful look. Soon the short-haired boy told Jalasis that the outcome had already been decided, looking at him with a calm gaze. The girl jokingly mentioned that she had been hugged and kissed by a sweet girl, while the young man next to her only listened silently, nervously sweating. She insisted it counted as a victory, but he doubted it.
Then they looked at the school building, and someone remarked that the reckless students lived for scenes like this and suggested they go back. At that moment, Ragnavel Brave's name was mentioned, and a long-haired girl approached the window, questioning his purpose and warning him that she would not spare him if he interfered. Finally, the determined girl with a ribbon in her hair silently vowed to carve her will into fate itself and into the world. The girl looked surprised and slightly embarrassed, wondering if the secret conversation between her friends was about the details of the date. Then two schoolgirls in uniform sat on a bench, one quickly denied what had been said, and the other asked about the walk around the city that night. At this point, the young man regretted missing the chance to intervene, guessing they might have been talking about a date. Later, the girl and the boy tried a fried street food treat together for the first time. After this, the young man noted that the guy seemed somewhat naive and unaccustomed to ordinary life, since just recently he couldn't even board a train on his own. Then he thought that she had figured him out, calling him hopeless in everything except fighting, and the girl herself reflected that despite her first impressions, he remained a mysterious person. Soon he admitted to himself, with surprise and embarrassment, that she looked cute, while his interlocutor herself calmly added that at that moment it was he who seemed cute. Later, one recalled how he took the initiative and held the boy's hand himself, showing him the capital, while a woman walked alongside him, wondering if it was Alicia who was accompanying him. The girl reacted with disbelief to the idea that Ragna's ideal date plan was determined by a roll of the dice, while he carried his companion in his arms through the burning city. During their first date, he pointed out the dragon breath burns on the stone, calling them the marks of a drunken monster, and she silently tossed her hair over her shoulder while another asked if he wanted to take the initiative. Meanwhile, two girls in uniform were discussing the end of their lunch break. One expressed a desire to be on par with a certain person, and the other silently listened to her confession. After this, the young man quietly thanked him for the food, and the woman sitting behind him on the bench admiringly noted that Ragna looked incredibly cute.